The heat that day felt heavy enough to press a person flat, the kind that wavered off the hard-packed street in restless ripples. It was the kind of afternoon when the whole town moved slower, as though conserving its breath, except for Sheriff Jedediah Hollister, who was in high form, his voice carrying over the general store's porch rail as though the dry air itself were his stage. Clara May stood at his side, her hands clasped at her waist, fingers laced so tightly they ached. Her calico dress was faded from too many washings, but she'd brushed it smooth that morning, smoothing every wrinkle, thinking that might be enough to make her invisible. She knew better now. Her father had a way of drawing eyes, and when he meant to, he could turn them all on someone else, especially her. He slapped his palm against the porch post, catching the attention of Elias Boone, who was passing on horseback. Elias's head turned just slightly, the brim of his hat shading his eyes, but his posture said he was about to keep moving. "Well now," the sheriff called, his grin broad but not kind, "looks like Providence has sent you a gift, Boone." He patted Clara's shoulder with a showman's flourish. "Ain't she just the thing for a quiet ranch? Don't eat much, don't take up space, and walk slower than a Sunday funeral, so you'll never lose her." The words were a joke to him. To the porch crowd, they were sport. Laughter rippled, sharp, mean, and quick to hide behind hands and hat brims. Clara's cheeks did not flush, though she felt the heat climb up her throat. She kept her eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the livery stable, willing her face into stillness, willing her legs not to betray their tremor. "She could help you keep your accounts," her father went on, his voice like a boot grinding dust into the floor. "Or maybe you could use her to scare off coyotes." That brought another round of laughter. Elias Boone's eyes, half hidden beneath his hat brim, moved from the sheriff to Clara. He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He tipped his hat in a slow, polite motion, the gesture somehow neither acceptance nor refusal, and rode on without a word. The crowd found something else to laugh at then, but their glances followed her as she stepped down off the porch, her limp making each movement deliberate. She didn't hurry, she had learned long ago that haste drew more stares than it avoided. She crossed the street without looking back, though she could feel the weight of her father's gaze, his satisfaction at having made her part of the afternoon's entertainment. The dust clung to her skirts, rising in little clouds with each step. She walked until the laughter was just a murmur, then nothing at all. That night, the sheriff held court again, this time in the back room of the saloon. Clara had come in the side door to collect a bundle of laundry from the barkeep's wife when she heard her name. She paused just beyond the lamplight, the murmur of voices sharpened by whiskey. "Told Boone no man would take her unless she came with a herd of cattle," her father was saying, his words met with chuckles and the scrape of chairs. "Girl's near 23 and still more trouble than she's worth. Limp like that, she couldn't keep pace with a milk cow." She slipped out before the next wave of laughter broke. The night air was cooler, but it carried the sour taste of those words, lodged somewhere beneath her ribs. She walked home in the dark, the moon silvering the dusty road, each step measured, each breath steady. By morning, the decision had rooted itself deep inside her. She would leave. There was nothing here she could not live without, no kindness not bound up with pity, no glance not shadowed by judgment. She packed quietly, a worn shawl, a small sewing kit, the leather-bound book her mother had left her, and the little satchel she could carry without slowing herself too much. At the first light, she stepped out of the small room at the back of her father's house and closed the door without a sound. The road out of town sloped gently upward, the dust cool beneath her boots in the early shade. She walked with her head high, as if each step were an act of defiance, though inside she felt the hollow ache of something breaking free and falling away. She had made it past the last fence post when she heard the faint thud of hooves behind her. Her grip tightened on the satchel strap. She didn't turn until the sound drew close enough for the breath of a horse to touch her shoulder. Elias Boone sat astride a roan gelding, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "If you're bound to walk that far," he said, his voice quiet, "at least let the horse carry your bag." She stared at him for a long moment. "I can manage." He nodded as if that settled nothing. Suit yourself. I'll ride along a spell. And he did, neither speaking nor urging her to quicken her pace, just letting the gelding keep time with her steps. They passed the weathered sign that marked the county line, the wind stirring the tall grass beyond. A mile out, her boot caught on a loose stone. Her knee buckled, sending a sharp pain shooting up her leg. She would have gone down if Elias hadn't swung down in one motion, his hand steadying her elbow. You all right? Yes, she said, though her breath was tight. Without comment, he took the satchel from her shoulder and tied it to his saddle. Then he pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it. She hesitated. He didn't urge her, only waited. Finally, she took it, the water cool and metallic on her tongue. The silence between them was not heavy. It was the kind of quiet that didn't demand to be filled, as if he were content to let the wind and the creak of saddle leather speak. They reached a crossroads where the prairie opened wide, the dirt road stretching like a ribbon toward the horizon. Elias glanced down that way, then at her. You've got somewhere in mind? Somewhere that's not here. He gave a small nod, as though that was reason enough. I could use help at the ranch. Not because you're a burden, because it's too quiet out there for one man. His tone was plain, free of the syrup of false kindness she'd come to know so well. It sounded less like an offer and more like an invitation to stand on her own ground. She looked past him to the open land. The sun was climbing higher, catching in the dust kicked up by the gelding's hooves. Somewhere far off, she could see the faint line of a fence, a sliver of roof just beyond it. He held the reins loosely, waiting. Clara took one more step down the road, then another toward the horse. The gelding shifted to make room as Elias offered his hand, steady and sure. She took it, the leather of his glove warm against her palm. As they rode toward the distant ranch house, the horizon seemed to widen with each hoofbeat. The sky was vast and unbroken, the wind carrying the scent of dry sage and something faintly sweet. Sometimes the wind carries you toward the place you didn't know was waiting. The house grew larger, sunlight striking its roof until it glowed like a promise. Clara kept her gaze on it, the ache in her leg fading to a dull hum beneath the steady rhythm of the horse's stride. She didn't know yet what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was walking away. The first weeks at Elias Boone's ranch slipped by with the quiet rhythm of work and weather. The mornings began in the soft blue of pre-dawn, when the earth still held the night's coolness. Clara rose early, moving carefully so her limp didn't jolt her awake more than the sun did, and brewed coffee before Elias came in from checking the stock. He never told her what chores to take on. He left the choice in her hands, which unsettled her at first. She weeded the garden until her fingers wore the scent of soil, mended harness straps with steady stitches, and read aloud from the single book of sermons Elias kept on a shelf, not for prayer, he told her, but because the language had a way of settling his mind. There were no grand gestures, no declarations, yet something shifted in the silences between them. When she returned from the well with buckets of water, there would already be a stool waiting so she didn't have to stand too long. At night, the chair by the fire would hold a folded blanket, placed there without comment. Still, the outside world crept in. Tommy Ray, the stable boy who came 3 times a week, brought news from town, Mrs. Price saying Clara was warming a widower's bed, the sheriff telling folks she was living off Boone's charity. Tommy spoke it with the awkwardness of someone who didn't know whether to warn her or spare her. Clara would only nod, though the words lodged deep, like burrs under skin. Autumn brought the fair to town, a gathering of ranchers and farmers, traders and peddlers. Elias hitched the wagon to sell cattle and buy winter supplies. Clara told herself she could stay behind, but the thought of hiding felt like a kind of surrender. She dressed plainly, pinned her hair neat, and climbed into the wagon beside him. The fairground was a riot of sound and color, brass music from a distant tent, the scent of fried dough mingling with the tang of horse sweat. People's eyes followed them, some curious, some cutting. Elias spoke little as he sold his cattle, weighing coins in his palm, noting each in a small ledger. They were halfway to the feed stall when a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Well, well," Sheriff Hollister called, stepping out from a knot of men. "Looks like Boone brought his little shadow with him." Clara felt her spine stiffen. "You keeping up all right there, girl?" the sheriff went on, his tone a performance. "Don't let him work you too hard, might throw that hip out again." A few men chuckled. Elias said nothing, his eyes on the sheriff. "She doesn't slow me down," Elias said at last, his voice level. The sheriff smirked. "Just saying, Boone, if you ever want to trade her in for a faster model, I might know a few." Clara turned, ready to walk away before the rest of the sentence could find her, but Elias stepped forward. "She's worth more than any herd I own." His voice wasn't raised, but it carried in the sudden hush. "I've seen her work from first light till the stars are out, without complaint, without cutting corners. She's not the one slowing folks down." A ripple moved through the crowd, whispers, the shift of boots on dirt. Elias's gaze didn't waver from the sheriff. "But maybe some folks mistake a loud mouth for strength." The sheriff's face tightened, a flicker of heat in his eyes, but he didn't answer. Around them, people began to look away, as if embarrassed to have been audience to the moment. Elias reached for Clara's hand, not as a signal, not for show, but as though it was the most natural thing in the world. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. Without hesitation, she let her fingers close around his. They left the fair without buying the feed. The wagon wheels hummed over the road, the late afternoon sun slanting gold across the prairie. Clara didn't speak. She could still feel the echo of his words in her chest, like the fading thrum of a struck bell. Back at the ranch, she set about tending the fire while Elias stored the wagon. The quiet between them was different now, thicker somehow, but not with things unsaid. When he came in, he brought the blanket from the chair and draped it over her shoulders before taking his seat across from her. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutter on the west side of the house. Inside, the warmth spread slowly, like water seeping into dry ground. She looked at Elias, his head bent over the ledger, the lamplight catching in the lines at the corners of his eyes. She thought of the crowd at the fair, the way they had turned their faces away, not because the world had changed, but because one man had stood still when it mattered. She would remember that stillness. The fire popped, sending a thin plume of smoke curling toward the chimney. Somewhere beyond the window, the prairie rolled out into darkness, endless and untamed. Dignity, she thought, wasn't something given or taken, it was something you carried, even when the world pretended not to see it. But sometimes, if you were lucky, someone would walk beside you long enough for you to notice the weight in your own hands. The clock on the mantel ticked steady, the minutes folding into the night. Elias didn't look up, but when he reached for his coffee, his hand brushed hers, just lightly. She didn't pull away. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of rain. She let it in.